The Sith believed they understood the dark places between worlds. For millennia, their alchemists and scholars had mapped the invisible currents of the Force, charting the abyss where pain, passion, and power coiled together like a living thing. In the Old Republic, such knowledge was currency. Entire empires rose on the backs of rituals whispered in forgotten tongues, rituals meant to tear open reality and drag strength from beyond the stars. On a barren frontier world beneath a blood-red sun, one such ritual was underway, carefully prepared, precisely calculated, and utterly doomed to fail. The night air above the obsidian plateau vibrated with heat and chanting. Sith acolytes stood in concentric rings around a stone dais, etched with ancient runes, their crimson robes snapping in the hot wind. At the center, a circle of blackened kyber fragments pulsed with malignant light, reacting to the Force being poured into them. The presiding Sith Lord raised a clawed gauntlet, his voice low and resonant as he called upon entities that existed beyond flesh and time. This was meant to be a summoning, an attempt to bind a dark side avatar, a living weapon to be unleashed against rival Sith and encroaching Jedi alike. The Force answered, just not as expected. The kyber fragments screamed. The air collapsed inward, folding like cloth pulled through a ring. A tear opened above the dais, not a clean hyperspace rupture, but something raw and violent, as if reality itself had been stabbed. The chanting faltered. Several acolytes staggered back, clutching their heads as a pressure unlike any Force surge they had felt before rolled across the plateau. The Sith Lord snarled, forcing more power into the ritual, determined to bend the anomaly to his will. Then something fell through. It hit the stone dais like a meteor of flesh and steel. The impact shattered rune-carved slabs and sent a shockwave racing outward, hurling acolytes to the ground. Dust and ash billowed into the air, briefly obscuring the center of the ritual circle. When the haze cleared, the Sith Lord saw not a demon, not a Force wraith, not a creature of pure darkness, but a man. He lay sprawled amid cracked stone, massive even by galactic standards, his body corded with muscle and scar tissue. Dark hair fell wildly around a face set in a permanent scowl, as if anger were his natural state. He wore no armor, only battered leather and mail, and a broad, heavy sword lay half-embedded in the fractured dais beside him. The blood trickled from a fresh cut on his brow, but even unconscious he looked less like a victim and more like a predator briefly stunned. The Force recoiled around him. The Sith Lord felt it immediately, a disturbance not of fear or light, but of refusal. The currents of the dark side slid across the fallen warrior and found no purchase, as if encountering stone where flesh should have been. The Lord's eyes narrowed. This was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. "Bind him," the Sith commanded. Acolytes moved in cautiously, some extending their hands to apply telekinetic restraints. The moment the Force touched the stranger's body, he stirred, one hand clenched into a fist. His eyes snapped open, blue, sharp, and burning with awareness despite the alien sky above him. He sucked in a breath that tasted of ash and ozone, then rolled to one knee and ripped his sword free from the stone with a grunt of effort. Conan of Camarilla did not know where he was, but he knew enemies when he saw them. He rose in a single fluid motion, muscles coiling as if the fall through worlds had been nothing more than a stumble. The chanting, the robes, the strange weapons crackling with red light. His instincts catalogued them all in a heartbeat. Sorcerers, then, or something close enough. And sorcerers, in Conan's long and bloody experience, were never to be trusted. The first acolyte hurled invisible force at him, intending to slam him back to the ground. Conan felt it like a sudden pressure against his chest, an unseen shove meant to break his balance. He planted his feet, teeth bared, and roared, not in fear, but in defiance. The force struck him hard enough to crack stone behind him, yet he did not fall. He slid back a step, boots scraping, then leaned forward into the pressure like a man pushing against a gale. Surprise flickered through the ranks of the Sith. Conan surged forward. His sword moved in a brutal arc, cleaving through robe and bone alike. The acolyte fell without a sound. Another raised a humming red blade, its light casting savage shadows across the plateau. Conan had never seen such a weapon, but he recognized danger instantly. He twisted aside as the blade hissed past, heat searing his arm. Pain flared and sharpened his focus. He smashed the pommel of his sword into the acolyte's face, felt cartilage collapse and kicked the body away. Blaster fire erupted from the outer ring, bolts of energy scorching the air. Conan ducked, rolled. Bjorn came up behind a fallen stone slab as explosions chewed into the ground where he had been standing. The Sith Lord watched with growing fascination. This was no summoned beast. This was a warrior, raw, unyielding, and utterly unafraid of power that had cowed systems. With a gesture, he unleashed a wave of dark side energy meant to crush the intruder's will, to drown him in terror and submission. Conan felt it like a sudden cold behind the eyes. Images flickered, visions of kneeling, of chains, of surrender. He snarled and spat blood onto the stone. "I kneel to no god," he growled, though no one there understood his tongue. His will, forged in pits, battlefields, and the betrayals of kings, rose like iron. The pressure cracked and broke against it. That moment sealed his fate. The Sith Lord did not press further. Instead, he smiled thinly and raised a hand. Stunfire replaced killing blows. Nets of energy wrapped around Conan, tangling his limbs despite his furious struggle. He fought like a cornered beast, dragging 3 acolytes down with him before the accumulated shock finally overwhelmed his body. His last sight before darkness claimed him was the red sun sinking toward the horizon, and the calm, calculating gaze of the Sith Lord who had decided he was too valuable to kill. Conan awoke to chains. Cold metal bit into his wrists and ankles, humming faintly with restrained energy. The air smelled of oil, sweat, and despair. He lay on the deck of a transport ship, its walls vibrating with the thrum of engines unlike any he had known. Around him, other prisoners stirred, beings of a dozen shapes and sizes, all bound, all broken in one way or another. Then through a narrow viewport, he glimpsed stars stretching into lines as the ship leapt into hyperspace. The Old Republic did not know his name. It did not know his world, his gods, or the long road of blood that had shaped him. It only knew that something dangerous had fallen into its grasp. As the transport carried him deeper into Sith-controlled space, toward labor pits and arenas where the strong were tested and the weak discarded, a legend began to form. Not in prophecy or the Force, but in whispers carried by frightened acolytes and greedy slavers. A man had come from beyond the stars, and the dark side could not bend him. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. Conan learned quickly that the stars could be as cruel as any desert or frozen plain. The transport dropped out of hyperspace above a world that looked dead from orbit, its surface a patchwork of rust-colored deserts and blackened scars where industry had chewed the land raw. A red sun hung low over the horizon, swollen and angry, casting the planet in perpetual dusk. As the ship descended, Conan felt the heat bleed through the hull, oppressive and unrelenting. This was no place of honor or glory. This was a place where life was spent cheaply. The landing bay doors slammed open with a shriek of tortured metal. Armed overseers stormed in, their armor dark and angular, their weapons trained on the prisoners. Commands barked in a harsh, clipped tongue, echoed through the hold. Then energy shackles tightened around Conan's limbs as he was dragged to his feet and shoved forward with the others. He towered over most of them, his muscles still coiled despite the drugs that dulled his reflexes, and more than one guard gave him a wary glance. They marched him out beneath the red sun. The heat struck like a hammer. The air shimmered, carrying the stink of sweat, scorched metal, and fear. Vast pits yawned across the landscape, ringed by scaffolding and watchtowers. Slaves toiled below, hacking at veins of glowing crystal embedded in the rock. Kyber, though Conan did not know the name. He only knew that the stones pulsed faintly, as if alive, and that the guards watched them with a possessive hunger. Chains clanked as the new arrivals were herded toward a processing platform. A towering alien with gray, their leathery skin and mechanical implants scanned them one by one, tagging collars around their necks. When Conan's turn came, the device hesitated, its sensors flickering. The alien snarled and struck him with an electrified prod. Pain exploded through Conan's body, white-hot and merciless, his muscles locked, teeth grinding as he fought not to cry out. The overseer leaned closer, jabbing him again for emphasis. Conan's vision narrowed to a red haze. When the prod withdrew, he sagged slightly, breath coming in ragged pulls, but he did not fall. The overseer laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound. "This one will last," it rasped in broken basic. Conan was thrown into the pits. Work was simple and brutal. Dig, haul, dig again. The Kyber veins ran deep, and the rock fought every strike. Conan's hands blistered, then split. The blood soaked the handle of the crude mining tool he was given. Around him, slaves collapsed from heat or exhaustion, only to be dragged away or shot where they lay. There was no rest, no mercy, only the endless rhythm of labor beneath an uncaring sun. Yet Conan endured. Where others bent and broke, he adapted. He learned the rhythm of the overseer's patrols, the blind spots where watchtowers overlapped poorly. He rationed his strength, conserving it during the worst hours of heat and spending it when it mattered, hauling twice what was demanded, earning grudging nods from hardened prisoners. At night, when they were herded into cramped holding pens, he listened. The galaxy revealed itself in fragments, words spoken in fear and anger, stories of Sith Lords who ruled from black citadels, of Jedi hunted to near extinction in these regions, and of wars so vast they swallowed entire systems. Conan did not care for their philosophies. He understood only this: the masters here were sorcerers, and sorcerers always believed themselves untouchable. That belief would kill them. Days bled into weeks. Conan's body hardened further under the strain, muscles carved sharper by labor and hunger. The collar around his neck hummed constantly, a reminder of the leash he wore, but even it seemed reluctant to tighten fully when he resisted. Once, when an overseer struck a smaller slave for faltering, Conan stepped between them without thinking. The shock that followed dropped him to one knee, but the collar did not fully activate. The overseer stared, confused, then backed away and called for reinforcements instead of pressing the issue. Whispers began to spread. The pits were not Conan's final destination. On the 31st cycle since his arrival, the guards came for him alone. He was dragged from the line and marched toward a different compound, one built not for labor, but for spectacle. The air grew louder as they approached, filled with the roar of a crowd. Conan smelled blood before he saw the arena. It was carved into the planet's crust like a wound. Tier upon tier of stone seating rose above a vast central pit, where sand had been stained dark by countless deaths. 4 sensitive elites lounged in shaded boxes, their eyes glittering with anticipation. Slaves were not meant to survive the pits forever. The strong were culled here for entertainment and profit. Conan was pushed into a holding cell beneath the arena. The door slammed shut behind him with finality, or across the narrow space, another prisoner sat chained to the wall, a Zabrak with broken horns and eyes dulled by pain. He looked up as Conan entered, then laughed softly. "You're the one," the Zabrak said, "the one the collars don't like." Conan said nothing. The Zabrak studied him for a long moment. "They'll throw beasts at you first, then men, then one of their apprentices, if you live that long." He swallowed. "If a red blade comes out, die fast." The gates rose. Sunlight flooded the arena floor as Conan was shoved forward. The crowd's roar crashed over him like surf. He stood alone in the sand, unarmed, chains removed but the collar still humming at his throat. Across the pit, massive doors groaned open. The first beast charged, a 4-legged horror of chitin and muscle, its mandibles dripping venom. Conan did not hesitate. He sprinted forward, scooped a fallen spear from the sand, and drove it into the creature's open maw with a roar. It collapsed at his feet, twitching. The crowd roared louder. More came. Conan moved like a storm, borrowing weapons from the dead, breaking necks with his bare hands when steel failed him. Pain became distant, an old companion he no longer bothered to acknowledge. When human fighters were sent against him, slaves promised freedom for his death. He met them with grim understanding. He did not hate them. He ended them quickly. Then the red blade ignited. A Sith apprentice stepped into the arena, cloak billowing, lightsaber humming with lethal promise. The apprentice smiled, confident, feeding on the crowd's hunger. He raised a hand, summoning the force to crush the barbarian's lungs. Conan felt the pressure and snarled. Yahui charged. The blade flashed, slicing through the spear Conan carried, molten metal spraying across the sand. Conan rolled beneath the next strike, came up inside the apprentice's guard, and smashed his fist into the Sith's throat. Surprise turned to terror. Conan tore the lightsaber free as it fell, the heat searing his hand. But he did not let go. With a bellow of pain and fury, he drove the humming blade through the apprentice's chest. Silence fell over the arena. Conan stood alone, breathing hard, smoke rising from his burned palm. He dropped the lightsaber and threw back his head, roaring his defiance at the sky. In the shadows of the high boxes, Sith Lords leaned forward, eyes alight with interest. The barbarian had survived, and now the galaxy was watching. Silence in a Sith arena was rarer than mercy. For several heartbeats after the apprentice fell, the crowd did not know how to react. The sand still smoked where the red blade had carved it, and the smell of scorched flesh lingered in the air. Conan stood unmoving at the center of the pit, chest heaving, his burned hand clenched tight to keep from shaking. Pain flared with every pulse of blood, but he welcomed it. Pain meant he still lived. Then the stands erupted, not with fear, but with hunger. The elites leaned forward in their shaded balconies, murmuring to one another in excited tones. Credits changed hands. Overseers barked new orders. Somewhere high above, a Sith Lord smiled, not the thin amused smile of passing interest, but the sharp calculating grin of a predator who had just spotted a rival beast worth claiming. Conan was dragged from the arena in chains heavier than before. This time, the guards did not strike him. They watched him warily, weapons trained on his back, as if expecting him to turn and tear through them at any moment. The burned flesh on his palm was hastily wrapped in synth fabric, the collar at his neck recalibrated and humming louder than ever. Yet even as they shoved him down a long torch-lit corridor, Conan felt something shift. The chains were no longer just tools of control. They were investments. He was brought not to the slave pens, but to a chamber of stone and metal, its walls etched with Sith runes that crawled and twisted when he looked at them too long. The air was cool here, heavy with the metallic tang of ozone and incense. Guards forced him to his knees at the center of the room, then retreated to the walls. Ill footsteps approached. The Sith Lord from the ritual entered with unhurried grace, his dark robes whispering across the floor. Up close, Conan could sense the wrongness of him, not merely cruelty, but a weight, as if the air itself bowed in his presence. Red eyes regarded Conan with open curiosity. "You should be dead," the Sith Lord said calmly. "Most men would have died twice over today." Conan lifted his head. His blue eyes were hard, unyielding. He said nothing. The Sith Lord circled him slowly. "You felt my power in the arena. The Force sought to claim you, to crush you, and yet—" He paused, reaching out with invisible tendrils of the dark side, brushing against Conan's mind. Conan felt it like fingers scraping across scar tissue. Memories flickered, frozen hills, blood-soaked battlefields, the faces of kings he had toppled and gods he had defied. The dark side pressed harder, trying to wedge itself into cracks that were not there. Conan growled low in his throat and clenched his fists. The Sith Lord's brow furrowed. "Fascinating," he murmured. "You do not resist like a Jedi. You do not shield yourself. You simply refuse." Conan spat on the stone between them. The guards stiffened, weapons raising, but the Sith Lord only laughed softly. "Good," he said. "Fire, not submission. That can be shaped." He stopped in front of Conan and extended a hand. Pain lanced through the collar, dropping Conan flat on his face. The Sith Lord's voice echoed in his skull. "Kneel." Conan gritted his teeth, muscles trembling as he forced himself up onto his knees again. Blood dripped from his lip. He met the Sith Lord's gaze and shook his head once. "No." The pressure increased, crushing, relentless. Stone cracked beneath Conan's hands as he struggled to breathe. For a moment, one dangerous moment, the Sith Lord felt something he had not anticipated. Resistance that bit back. The dark side surged, then recoiled, like a wave breaking against a cliff. The feedback made the Sith Lord stagger half a step, his composure cracking. He withdrew his hand sharply, eyes narrowing. "You are no Force-sensitive," he said slowly, "and yet you wound the dark side itself by denying it." He studied Conan anew. "Do you know what that makes you?" Conan hauled himself upright, chest heaving. "Free," he rasped. The Sith Lord smiled again, but this time there was steel in it. "No, but it makes you dangerous." Days passed under a new kind of confinement. Conan was given food enough to heal, water enough to regain strength. His chains remained, but lighter. He was tested, not with whips or beasts, but with power. Sith acolytes were sent against him in controlled bouts, some with blades, some with the Force alone. Conan learned quickly. He watched how the red blades moved, how their wielders overcommitted when they relied on power rather than skill. He learned when to rush, when to retreat, when to let the enemy exhaust themselves. He bled, he burned, he adapted. The acolytes began to fear him. Whispers spread beyond the arena world now, carried by smugglers and syndicate agents who trafficked in rumors as readily as spice. A slave who killed a Sith apprentice, a man the Force could not bend. "I'm in the shadows of the criminal underworld," Hutts and syndicate lieutenants took notice. A weapon like that, unaligned and unbreakable, could shift balances of power. The Sith Lord knew this. He summoned Conan once more, this time without guards. The chamber was quieter, the runes dimmed. The Sith Lord regarded him as one might regard a beast of war, valuable but never trusted. "You could rule worlds," the Sith Lord said, almost conversationally. "Serve me, and I will give you armies, ships, dominion beyond anything your primitive world could imagine." Conan listened, arms crossed, scars standing out stark against his skin. He understood enough from tone alone. Power offered, chains hidden behind promises. "I have served kings," Conan said slowly, each word a blade. They all wanted the same thing. "Good obedience." The Sith Lord's eyes flared. "I offer you victory. You offer me a leash." For a long moment, the chamber hummed with unspent violence. Then the Sith Lord laughed, sharp and cold. "Very well. If you will not be owned." His gaze hardened. "Then you will be tested." Orders were given, not for another duel, but for something larger. A message was sent to the arena masters, to the overseers, to the syndicates watching from afar. The barbarian would be unleashed, not as a slave, but as a spectacle meant to break him at last. A grand trial was coming, one that would decide whether Conan became a tool of the Sith or the spark of something far more dangerous. The trial was not announced with trumpets or ceremony. In Sith space, survival itself was proclamation enough. Conan learned of it through movement, through the sudden loosening of his restraints, through the way guards now watched him, not with contempt, but calculation. He was no longer just a slave or an experiment. He was a variable. And variables, in Sith philosophy, were either eliminated or exploited until they broke. The transport that carried him from the arena world was smaller, faster, and guarded by fewer soldiers. That alone told Conan much. They believed distance and technology would succeed where sorcery had faltered. He studied the ship's interior as they traveled, memorizing junctions, counting footsteps, listening to the subtle changes in engine pitch. This was not his first prison. It would not be his last. But they dropped him on a moon that smelled of rain and rust. Dense jungles swallowed the landing zone beyond a clearing of blackened stone. Lightning flickered constantly through low-hanging clouds, and the ground trembled faintly beneath Conan's boots. He was unshackled at the edge of the clearing, a pack tossed at his feet. Inside were basic rations, a crude blade, and a device that pulsed with a faint red glow. A collar. "This moon is contested," one of the guards said, keeping his distance. "Jedi relic hunters, criminal syndicates, force beasts, survive until extraction." He smirked. "If you can." The ship lifted off, vanishing into the storm. Conan stood alone beneath an alien sky, rain soaking his hair and skin within moments. He picked up the blade, testing its balance. Inferior, but serviceable. The collar hummed softly, now a reminder that even here, eyes watched him. He smiled. The jungle was alive in ways he had never known. Creatures chittered and howled from the undergrowth, and the force itself seemed to coil through the foliage like a living thing. Conan moved carefully, senses sharp, every step measured. He fashioned a spear from fallen branches, wrapped the handle with fiber torn from his pack, and smeared mud across his skin to dull his scent. Within hours he found signs of others, boot prints, blaster scoring on tree trunks, the aftermath of a skirmish, broken droids, blood not entirely human. Conan followed the trail with the patience of a hunter, circling wide, observing before engaging. The first group he encountered were not Sith. They were mercenaries, humans and aliens bearing mismatched armor and syndicate markings. Though they moved cautiously, arguing in low tones. Conan watched from the canopy as they debated whether the bounty was worth the risk. A red glow pulsed faintly beneath his skin as the collar reacted to his rising heartbeat. He dropped among them like a falling god. The fight was fast and ugly. Blaster bolts scorched the air, tearing chunks from bark and stone. Conan closed the distance before they could form ranks, his spear punching through armor gaps, his blade flashing in the rain. One mercenary tried to freeze him in place with a stun net. Conan ripped through it with brute force and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, shattering ribs. When it was over, the jungle was quiet again. Conan scavenged what he could, better weapons. A short-range blaster he did not trust but understood well enough to use. He stripped armor from the dead and moved on, deeper into the moon's interior. Somewhere ahead he could feel it, the pull of something old, something that hummed at the edge of his awareness like distant thunder. The relic. It lay within a ruined temple half swallowed by vines and stone. Ancient statues stared blindly as Conan approached, their features worn smooth by time. He stepped inside, senses screaming danger. The air was cold here, heavy with lingering power. This was no simple trap. This was a place where Jedi and Sith had once bled for knowledge. Conan reached the central chamber just as others arrived. Jedi. 3 of them emerged from the shadows, blades unlit but hands ready. Their robes were travel-worn, faces lined with caution rather than arrogance. They studied Conan with open confusion. "You're not Sith," one of them said slowly. Conan snorted. "If I were, you'd already be dead." The tension was thick enough to taste. The Jedi sensed something wrong about him. Not darkness, not light, but a stubborn absence that made their connection to the Force feel incomplete. Behind them, the relic pulsed. A holocron, its surface etched with symbols that predated the Republic. Before words could turn into violence, the collar screamed. Pain dropped Conan to one knee as the device activated remotely. The Sith Lord's voice echoed faintly through it, amused and cruel. "There it is," the voice said. "Choose, barbarian. Kill them. Or die." The Jedi ignited their blades as blaster fire erupted from the temple entrance. More mercenaries, syndicate hunters drawn by the same prize. Conan dragged himself upright, eyes blazing. He looked at the Jedi, at the mercenaries pouring in, at the relic humming with ancient lies. Then he made his choice. With a roar that echoed through the ruins, Conan tore the collar from his neck and hurled it into the relic's pedestal. The explosion rocked the temple, shards of stone raining down as the collar shorted out in a burst of energy. Pain lanced through him, but it was fading. For the first time since his arrival in this galaxy, the leash was gone. The Sith Lord's laughter cut off mid-snarl. Conan charged. Steel and light clashed in chaos as Conan wove between Jedi and mercenaries alike, not as ally or enemy, but as force of his own. He fought for no creed but survival and freedom, and in doing so, he shattered the trial's true purpose. When the dust settled, the temple lay in ruins. The mercenaries were dead or fled. The other Jedi stared at Conan in stunned silence. "You could have joined us," one said quietly. Conan wiped blood from his blade. "I join no one who thinks they own truth." He turned and walked back into the jungle as thunder rolled overhead. Somewhere far away, a Sith Lord felt control slip through his fingers and realized the barbarian had passed the trial in the worst possible way. He had become unbound. Conan moved through the jungle with the surety of a predator, each step measured, each sense honed to detect the slightest disturbance. The collar's destruction had freed him, but it had also broadcast a signal across the outer rim. Those who sought power, profit, or spectacle now knew there was a force in the galaxy that defied both Sith and Jedi alike. A barbarian from beyond the stars, unbound, unstoppable, and utterly unpredictable. As he emerged from the dense foliage, the moon's surface stretched out into jagged cliffs and blackened plains, scarred by centuries of mining and battles, long forgotten. In the distance, he saw smoke rising, a settlement, or perhaps a camp of hunters drawn by the tales that already began to circulate. The wind carried the acrid tang of burning fuel and the faint metallic scent of blood. Conan's hand went to the sword at his hip, fingers brushing leather worn soft with years of use. He had learned quickly that survival in this galaxy was not just about brute strength. It was about understanding who held power, who feared it, and who sought to exploit it. Criminal syndicates were the first real test. They were organized, merciless, and guided by cold calculation. They moved in groups, armed with blasters, grenades, and strange energy weapons. Their armor was a patchwork of stolen technology, pieced together to intimidate and protect. Conan did not care for intimidation. He cared for opportunity. He struck first. A group of 7 mercenaries had settled near a cliffside, their campfire casting grotesque shadows against rusted metal walls. Conan observed them from cover, noting patrol patterns, weapon types, and interpersonal dynamics. One mercenary was clearly in charge, barking orders and occasionally glancing nervously toward the jungle perimeter, as if sensing Conan's presence. The barbarian stepped into the open with silence that belied his size. The rain began again, drumming on leaves and metal, masking his approach. With a roar that split the night, he charged. Blaster bolts scissored through the air, scorching the ground where his feet had been moments before. He dodged instinctively, pivoting on the balls of his feet, catching one mercenary with a sweeping kick that sent him flying into the fire pit. The others tried to organize, but Conan was already upon them. He wrenched a plasma blade from a fallen mercenary and moved like a hurricane through the camp. Every strike was decisive, every movement precise. By the time he stopped, only one man remained alive, cowering, begging for mercy. Conan did not raise his blade. He walked away, leaving the man alive as a warning. No one could command him, and no one could bargain with him. The syndicate had learned a lesson. This was not a man to be enslaved, bribed, or bargained with. This was a storm. But the galaxy was full of storms, and forces more organized than syndicates were already aware of his existence. Far above, in a capital starship orbiting the outer rim, the Sith Lord who had first tried to summon Conan studied reports and holocrons alike. Intelligence agents, smugglers, and even Jedi whispers had reached him. The barbarian had escaped the trials. The collar had been destroyed. Worse, he had slain mercenaries and Force-sensitive apprentices alike without hesitation or mercy. "Or the barbarian," the Sith Lord muttered, eyes narrowing, "is no tool. He is a variable, and variables are dangerous." Meanwhile, in the shadowed halls of the huts, word of Conan's deeds traveled fast. Syndicates vied for information, credits, and influence. A hut named Zero the Black convened a council of lieutenants. He did not understand the barbarian's origins, nor did he care. What mattered was opportunity. A man who could fight the Sith, the Jedi, and entire mercenary companies could be turned into a weapon, if one were cunning enough to survive his fury. But Zero underestimated Conan, as all did. Conan did not act for power, nor for profit. He acted for survival, for freedom, and for the instinctive justice that had guided him through countless worlds and wars. He moved independently, it striking where necessary and vanishing like a shadow when pursuit became too heavy. He left chaos behind, not indiscriminate chaos, but precise, surgical devastation that left clear warnings for those who would seek to control him. His legend grew among the enslaved populations of the Outer Rim. Prisoners whispered his name around fire pits and sleeping cots. The one who cannot be commanded, they said, the one who will not kneel. Some dismissed the stories as fantasy, but many remembered the mercenaries' screams, the destruction of the arena, and the uncanny precision of his strikes. In this galaxy, reputation could be as lethal as any blade or blaster, and Conan's reputation was becoming a weapon in itself. The Sith Lord, however, had not given up. Plans were set in motion to capture the barbarian, not just for sport, but as a demonstration of power. Elite hunters, Force-sensitive assassins, and dark acolytes were mobilized. The galaxy's intelligence networks spread rumors of Conan's strength, drawing attention from Jedi scouts and rebellion sympathizers alike. Each report was laced with hyperbole, amplifying his myth and feeding the fear and fascination that surrounded him. Conan, however, moved with simplicity. He avoided major population centers, traveled through uncharted systems, and relied on instinct and skill rather than alliances. Occasionally, he encountered Jedi who sought to question him, to determine whether he was a threat or a potential ally. Conan met them with blunt honesty. "I answer to no one, no creed, no law, no god but my own hand and my sword." Most left him alone, the understanding that confrontation with him would not be a test. They would not survive it. It was not just the Force-sensitive who watched him. Mandalorians, too, had taken note of the barbarian's arrival. Clans sent scouts and emissaries to observe his movements, curious if such a warrior could rival their own legendary fighters. Some suggested approaching him, offering clan membership or mutual advantage, but others warned that Conan would brook no command. He was not a man to join, but perhaps one to observe and, if possible, learn from. One night, while Conan camped near a scorched plateau, he encountered a Force-sensitive criminal, a rogue who had fled the Jedi Order and now trafficked in illegal kyber crystals. The rogue attempted to use persuasion through the Force, trying to bend Conan's will subtly. The barbarian felt the presence brushing against him, not an overt attack, but an intrusion, a probing, testing his limits. Conan's blue eyes narrowed. He stepped forward, closing the distance, and the rogue realized, too late, that strength and instinct could overpower subtle manipulation. A single strike ended the encounter. It was in these isolated confrontations that Conan began to understand the rules of this galaxy. The Force was real, pervasive, and dangerous. Yet it did not control him. Technology, while alien, could be learned, adapted to, and exploited. Political factions could threaten him, but their power relied on predictability, and Conan thrived on unpredictability. He was not a hero, nor a villain. He was a force of nature, an anomaly that no ideology or weapon could contain. As weeks turned to months, Conan's path began to converge with larger galactic events. Reports of Sith movements, rebel skirmishes, and rogue mercenary operations intersected with his territory. He intercepted shipments of dangerous materials, disrupted assassination attempts, and even saved isolated colonies from raids, not out of altruism, but because the survival instinct demanded it. Each action reinforced his legend, painting him as a mythic figure capable of shaping outcomes without allegiance, without doctrine. The Sith Lord, observing from afar, realized the barbarian was now more than a threat. He was a catalyst. Conan's existence challenged the very fabric of control the Sith thought they wielded. Every agent sent to subdue him either returned in pieces, fled in terror, or simply vanished. The barbarian's skill, cunning, and raw physicality had proven adaptable to the alien rules of the Force and the galaxy's weaponry alike. It was during one particularly tense night, beneath the twin moons of a remote system, that Conan made a decision. He could continue moving blindly, reacting only to threats and survival. Or he could begin shaping the battlefield himself, taking control of moments that others assumed would be inevitable. It was not strategy in the formal sense, but it was instinct honed through decades of combat and betrayal. He would not serve, he would not kneel, but he would influence the galaxy enough that no faction could ignore him. Conan lit a small fire in a clearing, the smoke curling toward the storm-tossed sky. He sharpened his blades, tested his reflexes, and listened to the distant echoes of civilization. The galaxy's currents were shifting. Sith Lords grew cautious. Mercenaries feared the rumors that spread faster than they could control. Jedi debated whether he was a potential ally or a danger to balance itself. And in the shadowed corners, criminal syndicates watched, calculating risk against potential gain. He smiled, a feral curl of lips in the firelight. He did not belong to this galaxy. He did not belong to any cause, any creed, or any god. Yet through sheer will, strength, and cunning, he had carved a space where he ruled by nothing but instinct and skill. The next step, I was clear. The galaxy would come for him. Every faction, every intelligence network, every seeker of power. And he would be ready. Not to serve, not to ally, but to survive. And survival, Conan knew, was only the beginning. Because the barbarian was no longer just a man. He was a legend in motion. The galaxy was beginning to remember the barbarian. Systems whispered of a warrior who struck without allegiance, who had felled Sith apprentices, mercenaries, and rogue Force users alike. The story spread not through holovids or official transmissions, but through hushed words in cantinas, through smugglers' networks, and through the corridors of power where whispers carried weight. Conan's legend grew before he even set foot on a starship, before he even considered the broader reach of his actions. He moved with caution. The outer rim was dangerous, but it was not enough. The barbarian's path had begun to intersect with larger political currents, and each encounter brought him closer to a web of conflict he could no longer avoid. Sith acolytes had begun organizing hunting parties, determined to capture or kill him. The Jedi scouts had begun tracking his movements, seeking to determine whether he was a threat or a potential ally. Syndicates, once fearful, now plotted to manipulate or exploit him. The galaxy was watching, and everyone had an interest in the outcome. Conan had learned to survive on instinct and strength, but this was a new challenge. No longer was he simply avoiding harm. He had to anticipate the moves of others, to navigate the complex dance of power that governed the galaxy. Every decision carried consequences, and mistakes could be fatal. Yet Conan thrived in such conditions, his mind sharpened as much as his body, adapting to a reality that demanded strategy alongside brute force. One evening he arrived at a settlement perched on the cliffs of a volcanic world. The air shimmered with heat, and the ground trembled beneath the constant rumble of subterranean activity. The settlement was a nexus of criminal activity, a place where mercenaries, smugglers, and Force-sensitive rogues crossed paths. Conan approached cautiously, observing patterns of movement, noting where guards were lax and where surveillance was dense. He found himself in the middle of a skirmish within hours. A syndicate had targeted a shipment rumored to contain kyber shards, and both sides were willing to kill indiscriminately. Blaster fire tore through the settlement, screams echoed off the stone walls, and chaos reigned. Conan did not hesitate. He struck with precision, disarming one group, incapacitating another, and turning the conflict to his advantage. By the time the dust settled, he had eliminated the most immediate threats, but not without consequence. Buildings were damaged, and survivors fled to spread word of the barbarian who did not kill indiscriminately, but was unstoppable when provoked. It was here that he first encountered a Force-sensitive who did not underestimate him. A rogue Jedi, scarred from years of exile, moved with calm precision, anticipating Conan's attacks, parrying and countering in ways few could. The fight was brutal, a clash of strength and strategy, of instinct versus skill. Sparks flew as blades met, and Conan felt the subtle push and pull of the Force, not against him, but as a factor to consider. He realized that raw power alone would not suffice in these encounters. Observation, adaptation, and timing were just as critical. The rogue Jedi, impressed, spoke after the clash. "You are unusual, no force, yet you fight as if the galaxy itself bends to your will." Conan only grunted, acknowledging the truth without embellishment. He was no Jedi, no Sith, no soldier of the galaxy's myriad powers. He was something else entirely, an unbound force that could not be easily contained or predicted. Meanwhile, the Sith Lord who had first tested him grew increasingly impatient. Intelligence reports detailed every skirmish, every mercenary defeated, every settlement left in ruins. The barbarian was no longer a mere curiosity. He was a destabilizing variable in a galaxy already teetering under the weight of war and power struggles. The Sith dispatched elite hunters and dark apprentices, each selected for their skill and ruthlessness, to bring him under control. Yet every attempt failed. Conan's unpredictability, his sheer ferocity, and his adaptability made him untouchable. The growing legend reached other corners of the galaxy. Mandalorian clans debated whether this warrior could rival their greatest champions. Rebel cells considered him a potential ally, or a threat if left unchecked. Criminal syndicates weighed the value of capturing him against the risk of annihilation. Each faction's calculation was a gamble. For Conan did not operate by logic, alliances, or negotiation. He acted according to survival, instinct, and an unwavering sense of personal justice. In one encounter, Conan intercepted a group of bounty hunters sent by the Hutts to capture him. The hunters were well armed and coordinated, but they had underestimated the barbarian's cunning. Using the environment to his advantage, Conan lured them into a canyon where he could control their movements. Then turning their numbers against themselves, one by one they fell, either incapacitated or eliminated. The survivors fled, leaving word behind of a warrior whose power could not be measured by conventional means. As he moved through systems, Conan began to understand the galaxy in ways unfamiliar to him. Power was not always brute force. It was influence, fear, and reputation. The barbarian, once an outsider, had inadvertently become a symbol. Systems whispered of him, not because they had seen him, but because the consequences of his actions reached them through rumor and survivor accounts. Every victory, every clash, every survival reinforced the myth. Yet Conan's independence drew attention from an unexpected quarter. The Sith Lords' rivals within the Order. Through secret factions and ambitious apprentices began to see the barbarian as an opportunity. If controlled, He could be used to eliminate rivals, to tip balances of power, or to destabilize enemies. Conan, however, could not be controlled. Attempts to manipulate him only resulted in chaos for those who tried. The barbarian's next encounter tested his limits further. A group of Force-sensitive mercenaries, coordinated and ruthless, ambushed him on a planet scarred by volcanic activity. Lava streams, toxic gases, and unstable terrain challenged every instinct he possessed. Conan moved through the battlefield with calculated efficiency, using every available advantage. He improvised weapons, exploited environmental hazards, and leveraged the weaknesses of his enemies. Each victory came at a cost, leaving him bloodied and bruised, yet unbroken. The aftermath revealed the growing scale of his impact. Local settlements hailed him as a protector or avenger, depending on perspective. Syndicates and criminal factions recalculated their positions. Jedi who had followed him reconsidered their initial assumptions. And somewhere in the darkness of Sith space, the original Lord who had tested him seethed with a combination of fascination and fury. Conan understood the implications of his actions. He was no longer simply surviving. He was shaping the galaxy, not through politics or alliances, but through sheer force of will and action. Each choice he made, each battle fought, sent ripples across the outer rim and into systems that had once been stable under the shadow of Sith and Imperial influence. By the time he paused atop a cliff overlooking a storm-tossed ocean, though Conan's path was clear. He would not kneel, he would not serve, but he would continue to survive, fight, and influence the galaxy in ways that others could not anticipate. The barbarian was not a tool, not a weapon, not a pawn. He was an agent of chaos and power, moving according to instinct, principle, and the laws of survival alone. As lightning split the sky and the thunder rolled across the water, Conan sheathed his blade. He gazed at the horizon, knowing that forces both light and dark were now aware of him, aware that he could not be commanded or contained. The galaxy was no longer a distant backdrop to his adventures. It was a stage, and he had become one of its most dangerous actors. The storm had followed him for days, rolling across the jagged expanse of the volcanic world like a living entity. Lightning illuminated the blackened rock and molten rivers, flickering against jagged cliffs that rose like jagged teeth from the crusted ground. Conan moved with deliberate caution, boots splashing in acidic puddles, cloak plastered to his skin by the unrelenting rain. The galaxy had begun to recognize him, not as a man, but as a force. Every battle, every rumor, every clash had drawn attention from those who understood the danger of an uncontrollable variable. He had expected mercenaries, Sith hunters, and criminal enforcers, but the scale of the opposition awaiting him on this remote volcanic moon was unprecedented. Word of his independence and brutality had reached a coalition of parties who saw him either as a threat or a tool too valuable to leave unchecked. Sith acolytes, coordinated with rogue Jedi, syndicate mercenaries, and bounty hunters, converging from multiple systems under the pretense of neutral ground, a ruined colony, its buildings scorched and crumbling, a place abandoned by the Republic decades before. Conan observed the battlefield from the ridge above, noting the movements below. The combined force numbered nearly 100 combatants, each trained, armed, and prepared to take him down. Sith acolytes wielded red-bladed lightsabers with lethal grace. The rogue Jedi moved in coordinated pairs, their blue and green blades flashing in precision attacks. Syndicate mercenaries deployed blaster turrets, automated drones, and energy nets. That every faction operated with efficiency and intent, Yet none anticipated the unpredictability of a barbarian who had never known strategy in the formal sense, but lived and fought by instinct and adaptation. The first clash came without warning. A squad of mercenaries attempted to flank him from the east, using the cratered landscape as cover. Conan had anticipated such movement, having spent hours studying the approach and predicting patrol patterns. He descended like a shadow from the cliff, landing among the first wave with brutal precision. A single sweep of his blade shattered a drone. Another swung into a mercenary's throat before the man could raise his blaster. He moved like a whirlwind, each strike exact, each movement timed to incapacitate multiple enemies at once. Above the chaos, two Sith acolytes ignited their red blades, not advancing from the high ground. They coordinated, forcing Conan to adapt in real time. His instincts screamed as they attacked with the dark side, guiding their movements. But the barbarian's body was a weapon honed for battle. He deflected, countered, and exploited the terrain, sending rocks tumbling toward them, forcing them to stagger. When they approached too closely, he ducked under a spinning blade and slammed his shoulder into one, sending the Sith tumbling down the rocky incline, unconscious but alive. It was during the mid-battle lull that Conan became aware of the rogue Jedi attempting to use the Force. They sought subtle persuasion, bending the battlefield's energy to guide his movements, to channel him toward traps and ambushes. Conan felt it like an itch in his mind, a sensation he had encountered before, yet never so pervasive. Instead of resisting or fleeing, he adapted. He turned the Force's influence into opportunity, luring attackers into areas where terrain favored him, creating chaos among their coordinated assault. By the time the Jedi realized his tactic, he had already neutralized several of their allies and disappeared into the smoke and shadows. The mercenaries, frustrated by their losses, attempted a coordinated strike using explosive charges and automated turrets. Conan anticipated their pattern, rolling between eruptions of fire and molten rock, cutting turrets with blades and tossing grenades into clusters of mercenaries with unerring accuracy. Each encounter reinforced his reputation, not only as a warrior but as a strategist who operated beyond the bounds of conventional tactics. The galaxy began to understand that Conan was no mere fighter. He was an unpredictable storm, reshaping engagements simply by existing in them. The battle escalated as the Sith Lord overseeing the operation appeared in the crater's center. He had come personally, arriving in a sleek shuttle that disgorged his elite guards. His presence radiated power, the dark side coiling around him like smoke. He studied Conan carefully, his red eyes narrowing. "You defy the galaxy," he said, voice booming over the chaos. "You are no man. You are a disruption, and yet I will not underestimate you." Conan did not answer. Words were useless against a galaxy that moved in blasters and blades. Instead, he charged, meeting the Sith Lord's elite guards in a flurry of violence. Sparks flew where lightsabers met his steel. The blaster bolts scorched the ground around him as he wove through attacks with both brute force and cunning, each motion calculated instinctively. For every strike that landed against him, he countered, exploiting overextensions and environmental hazards. Lava streams, unstable cliffs, and falling debris became weapons, turning the battlefield itself into an ally. Amid the chaos, civilians trapped in abandoned outposts cried out for aid. Conan did not pause for politics, nor did he consider alliances. Yet he did act. A group of injured settlers was cornered by rogue mercenaries. Conan intervened, cutting a path through the attackers and shielding the civilians, using them as leverage to manipulate enemy movements without endangering them unnecessarily. The moral calculus of survival intersected with instinctive justice, when Conan realized that his choices, while brutal, carried consequences beyond the battlefield. Hours passed, and the battle became a war of attrition. The Sith acolytes grew cautious, realizing that the barbarian did not fight like any Force-sensitive they had encountered. Their attacks, while precise, were met with unmatched adaptability. The mercenaries, demoralized, began retreating, leaving only the most dedicated hunters behind. Even the rogue Jedi hesitated, recalculating strategies against a warrior who acted without predictability. In a decisive moment, Conan faced the Sith Lord directly. Red and blue light clashed with steel, and the force of each strike sent shockwaves through the volcanic ash. The barbarian, bruised and battered but unbroken, recognized the stakes. He could not afford hesitation. Yet the Sith Lord pressed relentlessly, using both power and tactical cunning, attempting to bend the battlefield's energy against him. Conan countered, exploiting openings created by overconfidence, and delivered strikes precise enough to disable guards and knock the Lord off balance. As the final confrontation unfolded, explosions rocked the crater, rocks collapsed, and the storm raged overhead. Conan's strategy evolved with every movement. He used the terrain, the enemy's momentum, and their expectations against them. The Sith Lord realized too late that the barbarian was no ordinary opponent. He was not bound by allegiance, training, or ideology. His fury, skill, and instinct made him an unpredictable weapon that could not be contained. The battle concluded with the Sith Lord retreating, his remaining forces scattered. Conan stood amid the ruin, rain washing ash and blood from his skin, eyes blazing with the satisfaction of survival and the grim understanding of the chaos he had wrought. Around him, survivors, mercenaries, rogue Jedi, civilians, watched silently, recognizing the barbarian not as a man but as a force that could not be tamed, negotiated with, or predicted. From the shadows, the galaxy took notice. News of Conan's battle spread rapidly through hyperlane networks, carried by those who had witnessed it and those who feared its implications. Criminal syndicates debated whether it was worth attempting to control him. Mandalorians considered him a warrior, rivaling their own legends. Jedi councils argued over whether he was a threat to balance or a potential ally to observe. The Sith Lord, seething in retreat, vowed that this was not over. The barbarian was a disruption, and disruptions could not be ignored. Conan, however, did not pause to consider politics or alliances. He moved onward, following the instinctive pull of survival and personal code. He had learned that in this galaxy, power was fluid, and reputation could be as deadly as a blade. Every battle, every decision, every act of defiance shaped how the galaxy perceived him. He was no longer merely surviving. He was influencing outcomes, rewriting expectations, and forcing the major powers to acknowledge an anomaly that could not be commanded. He paused on a ridge overlooking the battlefield's aftermath, surveying the twisted metal, shattered stone, and fallen combatants. The storm continued to rage, and he felt the pulse of the galaxy in a way he had not before. Not through the Force, but through the tangible consequences of his actions. He understood now that his presence alone was enough to shift the balance, and that each choice carried weight far beyond his immediate survival. As the sun broke through the storm clouds, painting the ash and lava in streaks of orange and red, Conan sheathed his blade and set his gaze toward the horizon. The galaxy had begun to fear him, to respect him, to recognize him as something beyond legend. He He was not bound by Sith will, Jedi philosophy, or political decree. He was a force of nature, unyielding, unpredictable, and unstoppable, and he had only just begun. The galaxy was no longer merely observing Conan, it was reacting. Reports of his actions spread faster than hyperspace transmissions, amplified by survivors, smugglers, and bounty hunters who had witnessed his wrath. Systems whispered of a barbarian who defied the Force, who had survived battles against Sith, rogue Jedi, mercenary coalitions, and criminal syndicates simultaneously. He had become a singular point of chaos, a force that no faction could ignore, yet none could predict or contain. Conan moved through the outer rim with deliberate purpose, though no map guided him. Every planet, every settlement, every isolated colony presented both opportunity and risk. He had learned that the galaxy was a living entity in itself, with currents of power, loyalty, and fear as palpable as the winds and storms he had traversed. And now, the currents were beginning to converge toward him. His path brought him to a frontier system recently destabilized by a collision of interests. The remnants of a separatist fleet, imperial warlords seeking to consolidate power, and a newly formed rebel cell attempting to reclaim territory. Each faction sought to establish dominance over the system, unaware that a third variable had already arrived, a warrior unconstrained by ideology, alliances, or morality beyond survival. Conan watched from the rim of a cratered moon as the factions maneuvered. Ships streaked across the sky, blaster fire illuminated the darkness, and explosions rocked orbital stations. The barbarians' approach was not sudden, it was deliberate, using shadows, terrain, and timing to infiltrate the battlefield unnoticed. He moved as a ghost among soldiers and mercenaries, striking decisively where it would create maximum disruption with minimal exposure. The principle was simple. Chaos first, survival always. He encountered the Separatists' leadership in a command facility carved from black volcanic stone. Droid sentries were his first obstacle. Conan, unfamiliar with their exact construction, but instinctively adapting, used a combination of brute force and environmental hazards, collapsing supports, detonating fuel lines, and swinging his blade with surgical precision, dismantled the automated guards. Sparks flew, circuits burned, and the droids fell in heaps, creating pathways for his advance. The Separatist commanders were not so easily removed. They coordinated a defense using strategic choke points, turrets, and elite droid units. The Conan adapted in turn. He utilized the corridors as channels, forcing enemy units into narrow passages where their numbers became a liability rather than an advantage. His movement was a combination of instinct, experience, and adaptability, the culmination of battles fought across worlds and dimensions. No force, no formal strategy, just the mind of a predator honed to the apex of survival and efficiency. From orbital heights, a squadron of Imperial gunships had detected the commotion. They moved to intervene, their heavy cannons tracking the barbarians' movements. Conan anticipated their trajectory. He lured Separatist units into vulnerable positions beneath the orbital assault, exploiting the chaos to topple walls and structures onto advancing troops. His instincts translated the orbital fire into terrain advantages, turning an incoming threat into a tool of destruction against the enemy. Amid the clash, Conan noticed a contingent of rogue Jedi attempting to manipulate the Force to contain him. Their efforts were more coordinated than previous encounters, attempting to restrict his movements and manipulate environmental energy to their advantage. Conan countered instinctively, using speed, positioning, and psychological pressure to force mistakes. A fallen pillar, a cascading wall, and precise strikes with both blade and improvised weaponry eliminated several attackers simultaneously. The battle escalated further when a syndicate warlord arrived in a heavily armed landing craft, deploying mercenaries with advanced exosuits and energy weaponry. The warlord intended to capture Conan alive, seeing the barbarian's legend as both a threat and an asset. Conan's response was swift and unrelenting. Using debris, terrain, and sheer ferocity, he dismantled the landing operation, neutralized exosuit mercenaries, and sent the warlord fleeing. The chaotic sequence of events left both rebel and imperial observers stunned. This was not mere combat, but a deliberate orchestration of destruction designed to overwhelm, confuse, and dominate. Hours passed in a blur of fire, steel, and molten rock. By the end, the system's factions were scattered, their command chains broken, their troops demoralized. Survivors whispered the same word across the galaxy. The barbarian was unstoppable. He did not kill indiscriminately, but he chose targets with a precision that made survival unlikely for anyone opposing him. His legend solidified not just through survival, but through tangible results that affected galactic politics, military planning, and factional calculations. Yet the battle had consequences. Conan observed the devastation, the ruined settlements, and the civilian casualties that could not be avoided. For the first time, he confronted a moral complexity deeper than simple survival. He had fought for instinct, for freedom, for self-preservation, yet the galaxy's structures, its people, its systems, suffered as a result. This was not the blood of enemies alone, but collateral, unavoidable, and yet weighing on his conscience. He realized that being a force unconstrained by allegiance carried responsibility even he did not initially understand. The Sith Lord, observing from afar, grew increasingly concerned. Conan's actions were no longer isolated. They were reshaping the Outer Rim's political landscape. Systems previously loyal to one faction now hesitated, factions reevaluated strategies, and even the Jedi Council debated whether his presence was a threat or a variable to be exploited. The barbarian was no longer a threat to individuals. He was a destabilizing force to galactic equilibrium itself. Recognizing the stakes, Conan continued his campaign of controlled disruption, using his knowledge of factional divisions to create chaos strategically rather than indiscriminately. He dismantled warlord operations without annihilating settlements entirely, trapped mercenary units in terrain that neutralized them without unnecessary loss of life, and manipulated environmental hazards to redirect the energy of opposing factions against each other. Or this was instinct guided by experience, brute force refined through observation, and morality filtered through survival and necessity. By the time the smoke cleared, the galaxy had witnessed a new kind of power, a force unbound by ideology, allegiance, or doctrine, capable of dismantling armies, surviving assaults from the most trained combatants, and influencing systems without conventional strategy. Conan had become more than a man. He was a living disruption, a myth growing with every confrontation, a variable no faction could anticipate or ignore. Even as he rested atop a ridge, surveying the ruin he had left behind, Conan knew that the consequences of his actions were far-reaching. The galaxy's currents would not settle. Every faction he touched would adjust, recalibrate, and react. Imperial forces would strengthen patrols. The Sith Lords would mobilize assassins, rebel factions would attempt alliances, and syndicates would plot revenge or exploitation. Conan had made his presence known, and now the galaxy itself would respond. Yet amidst the chaos, Conan retained clarity. He did not seek dominion, wealth, or power beyond survival and the instinctive drive to act according to his code. But he had learned that in this galaxy, survival was not merely a matter of skill or strength. It was about influence, perception, and the understanding that every action, even instinctive, reshaped reality. He had become both predator and storm, reshaping the battlefield on a scale no faction anticipated, leaving the galaxy uncertain and fearful of what was to come. The barbarian's gaze turned to the stars. Hyperspace lanes stretched out like veins across the galaxy, carrying with them the promise of future confrontations. Each system held potential threats, alliances, and opportunities. Every step forward would be met with resistance, yet Conan welcomed it. For the first time, he understood that he was not merely surviving in the galaxy, he was shaping it, one clash, one battle, one impossible encounter at a time. And as the twin suns rose over the volcanic horizon, casting the remnants of the battlefield in gold and ash, Conan's legend solidified further. He was no longer simply a warrior. He was a variable that had reshaped the galaxy, a force untamed by ideology or allegiance, feared and respected in equal measure. And the galaxy had no choice but to reckon with him. The galaxy's currents had converged. Conan could feel it, not through the Force, not through sensors, but through instinct, the pulse of impending chaos, the whisper of countless lives hanging on the edge of calamity. Word of his deeds had traveled faster than any holonet transmission. The outer rim, normally fragmented by apathy, greed, and fear, had begun to pulse with coordinated opposition. Sith Lords, rogue Jedi, Imperial enforcers, rebel cells, Mandalorian clans, and criminal syndicates had all mobilized. Each faction saw the barbarian differently: threat, opportunity, anomaly. Yet all shared one certainty: he could not be allowed to persist unchallenged. He arrived on the volcanic moon of Vokar Prime at the moment the storm was at its zenith. Lightning split the sky in jagged fractures, revealing the shattered surface below. Bescarred by hundreds of prior skirmishes, fires burned in chasms, molten rivers bubbled like living veins, and clouds of ash and smoke obscured vision. Here, the galaxy's greatest predators would converge, and Conan's instincts told him this battle would decide not only survival, but legend itself. From orbit, Imperial Star destroyers maneuvered into position, their targeting grids locked onto the surface, scanning for life signatures. Rogue Jedi patrolled from above in swift starcraft, prepared to manipulate the Force and trap him. Sith assassins emerged from the shadows, blending dark energy with lethal skill. Mercenary warlords deployed mechanized suits and orbital artillery, while Mandalorian clans descended from the sky in precision drops, seeking honor in combat. Even rebel forces, desperate to assert control in a chaotic sector, arrived in nimble strikecraft, hoping to exploit the confusion. Conan descended from the cliffs with purpose, his boots sparking against molten rock, cloak drenched in acidic rain. He did not hesitate. Strategy, instinct, and survival merged into a single drive. Every step, every glance, every strike would determine the outcome. The battlefield itself became a weapon in his hands. The first wave emerged from the northeast, Sith acolytes, lightsabers ignited, moving with dark precision. Conan met them on the jagged slopes, dodging their strikes with uncanny agility, deflecting energy with reinforced steel, and exploiting terrain to unbalance them. Each clash sent shockwaves of energy across the cragged landscape. He moved like a storm, unpredictable and unstoppable, dismantling units faster than coordinated attacks could adapt. Yet from above, Rogue Jedi attempted to manipulate the Force. They sought to anticipate his moves, to channel him into traps. Conan recognized the subtle push in the air, the whisper of invisible threads guiding him toward danger. He did not resist. They could not control him, but instead turned the interference into an advantage, moving in ways that forced attackers into natural hazards, collapsing cliffs, molten rivers, and falling debris. Precision strikes followed, cutting down enemies who had underestimated a warrior untethered to the Force. On the western plateau, Mandalorian drop pods impacted, armored warriors emerging with Beskar gleaming in the stormlight. Conan observed their movements, noting formations and predicted paths. With a roar, he charged, using debris, fallen enemies, and environmental hazards to split their ranks. His blade struck with the efficiency of a predator, cutting through armor, disabling exosuits, and toppling leaders. Each movement was instinctive, yet calculated, a dance of chaos that left even seasoned Mandalorian warriors unsettled. Imperial artillery fire rained down from orbit, obliterating sections of rock and metal. Blaster fire, missiles, and strafing runs created a maelstrom. Conan adapted, ducking beneath plasma blasts, rolling between falling structures, and using explosions as cover to advance on enemies who had relied on overwhelming firepower. The barbarian turned the Empire's might against itself, using the battlefield as an extension of his will. Mid-battle, a syndicate warlord attempted to seize the opportunity. Deploying a squad of mechanized enforcers, energy nets, and mercenaries with advanced weaponry, he sought to capture Conan alive. But the barbarian had anticipated such desperation, using molten streams, crumbling cliffs, and the weight of falling debris. He dismantled their operation with a combination of brute strength and environmental manipulation. Survivors fled, leaving the warlord's plans in ashes. Despite overwhelming odds, Conan paused long enough to notice civilians caught in the crossfire, miners, settlers, refugees, fleeing the volcanic chaos. For the first time, the weight of moral responsibility pressed upon him. His instinct for survival alone was no longer enough. Lives hung in the balance, and his actions directly influenced the fate of innocents. With precision and ruthless efficiency, he redirected the battlefield, creating pathways of safety while maintaining lethal pressure on enemies. He became not just predator, but protector in his own uncompromising code. Hours turned into a blur, the battlefield fractured into multiple engagements, Conan appearing simultaneously in different zones through speed, intuition, and mastery of terrain. Rogue Jedi were forced to abandon coordination. Sith assassins fell to traps of debris and fire. Imperial squads were split and annihilated. Mandalorians regrouped only to find themselves outmaneuvered by a barbarian who anticipated strategy instinctively. Even rebel strike teams, hoping to exploit chaos, were caught in the maelstrom, their pilots watching in awe and fear as Conan dismantled units faster than reinforcements could arrive. Then came the apex, the Sith Lord who had first tested him, arriving in person atop a mechanized war platform, surrounded by elite acolytes and enforcers. The dark energy radiating from him twisted the air, bending the battlefield into a web of potential peril. Conan recognized the stakes. This was no mere skirmish. Every previous battle had prepared him for this confrontation. Here, brute strength, instinct, and adaptability would meet the full measure of the dark side. The clash was immediate and devastating. Sparks flew as steel met lightsaber. Molten rock erupted under forceful blows. The air screamed with energy discharge. Conan moved like a whirlwind, striking with precision and raw power, exploiting openings in Sith defenses. The Lord's attacks were methodical, lethal, and relentless, yet the barbarian adapted. Every maneuver of the enemy was countered with instinctive calculation, terrain exploitation, and brutal improvisation. Now simultaneously, other factions attempted to capitalize on the distraction. Mandalorians engaged Imperial squads, rogue Jedi attempted flanking maneuvers, mercenaries sought to regain control of choke points. Conan navigated this chaos with uncanny awareness. He prioritized threats based on immediate danger, civilian risk, and opportunity. No enemy could predict him, no faction could control him. He was a storm given flesh, a force that reshaped the battlefield as he moved. Civilians continued to flee, but the barbarian ensured their paths were relatively safe. One group cornered near a molten river was rescued by Conan, using a combination of raw strength and environmental improvisation. He swung through the chaos, lifting beams, throwing attackers into lava flows, and clearing the path for the innocents. For a moment, not even the most seasoned warriors recognized that Conan's power was not solely in violence. It was in dominance of environment, enemy, and battlefield perception simultaneously. The battle reached its zenith when the Sith Lord unleashed the full spectrum of the dark side: telekinetic strikes, force lightning, and manipulation of battlefield hazards to crush the barbarian. Conan's instincts responded instantaneously. He used every rock, every molten fissure, every fragment of debris to counteract the force. Sparks from clashing lightsabers and steel illuminated the storm, and he moved as though the battlefield itself obeyed his command. Every attack from the Sith Lord was met with a counter-strike. Every trap was anticipated and reversed. Hours passed in relentless combat, yet Conan endured. Wounds accumulated, armor dented, the energy drained. But the barbarian refused to yield. Each moment of exertion, each calculated strike, further solidified his legend. Factions that had once sought to control or exploit him now viewed him as an unpredictable element that could tip the galaxy's balance. Every action echoed across the outer rim, destabilizing plans and recalibrating strategies for those watching from orbit or afar. Finally, Conan seized the critical moment. Exploiting the terrain, a molten fissure, and the overextension of the Sith Lord's energy, he delivered a decisive strike. Steel and force collided, the impact sending shockwaves that toppled structures and sent enemies sprawling. The Sith Lord fell, wounded and retreating, his elite acolytes scattered. The battlefield, chaotic and scarred, lay in ruins, yet the barbarian stood unbroken. Then silence descended briefly. Survivors, mercenaries, rogue Jedi, Mandalorians, rebels, civilians, looked upon the figure who had withstood the galaxy's combined might. He was not just a warrior, he was an unstoppable force, a living storm, and the galaxy understood in that moment that Conan was beyond control, beyond prediction, beyond allegiance. And yet amidst the devastation, the barbarian reflected. The cost of survival had grown heavier. Civilians suffered despite his efforts. Entire factions had been fractured, leaders fled or annihilated, and systems destabilized. His instincts and moral code had guided him to protect life where possible, but survival alone had consequences. The barbarian realized that the galaxy was a living entity, and every act of violence, every choice, left ripples far beyond immediate perception. Conan looked to the horizon, rain mixing with ash, lightning illuminating the ruin. The battle had solidified his legend. He had survived where armies, Sith, Jedi, mercenaries, and political forces had converged. He had reshaped the outer rim, imposed his will upon a galaxy unprepared for a force untethered by ideology, and proven that instinct, strength, and adaptability could rival even the most disciplined powers of the Force. Yet Conan knew this was not the end. The galaxy had taken notice, and with notice came response. Systems would seek vengeance, alliances would form against him, and threats even greater than those faced today would emerge. He had become a storm the galaxy could neither control nor predict. He sheathed his blade, bloodied, scarred, yet unbroken. Above the crater, a storm began to abate. The revealing stars scattered across the black void of space. Each star represented a system that had yet to reckon with his presence. The barbarian understood that his journey had only just entered its most dangerous phase. He had survived the impossible, yet the galaxy's true challenge remained ahead. And as he strode through the ruins, observing the battlefield with unflinching eyes, Conan realized a truth deeper than any instinct or training. He was no longer simply a warrior in this galaxy. He was a legend, a force beyond control, a variable that could shift the tides of history itself. And the galaxy, for all its factions, philosophies, and powers, would never forget his name. The galaxy had changed in the wake of Conan's onslaught. Vokar Prime, once a quiet, volcanic outpost on the edge of the Outer Rim, was now a scarred monument to his passage. Ash and molten rock mingled with debris, smoke curling into the sky as if the planet itself bore witness to the chaos. Across hyperspace lanes, systems whispered of a barbarian who defied Sith, Jedi, mercenaries, Mandalorians, and Imperial forces alike. His legend had become tangible, a storm whose name traveled faster than holonet signals. Conan moved away from the shattered crater, boots sinking into scorched soil, the weight of battles fought pressing on him, physically and mentally. Though he had survived impossible odds, he understood that the galaxy's reaction would escalate. Factions that had survived his previous attacks, criminal syndicates, scattered Jedi, and remnants of the Sith and Imperial forces were already recalibrating. Reinforcements, assassins, and spies were mobilizing. The barbarian's actions had not only secured survival, but reshaped the strategic landscape of the Outer Rim and beyond. His first priority was the civilians. Many had fled into the nearby ash-choked valleys, their faces etched with fear, awe, and relief. Conan guided them away from hotspots, using his experience to anticipate collapsing terrain and lingering threats. He knew that these survivors would carry tales of his actions across systems, further amplifying his reputation. Yet he also recognized that stories alone could not secure safety. Physical protection required vigilance, something he was accustomed to in his own world, but now adapted to the galaxy's myriad threats. As he navigated the hazardous terrain, a contingent of Mandalorian scouts appeared, observing him from a distance. Their presence was not immediately hostile. They studied him with cautious respect, their sensors tracking his movement, their leader whispering in Mandoa about the barbarian's uncanny ability to survive and dominate simultaneously. Conan noticed the attention, but did not seek confrontation. He understood that perception could be as powerful a weapon as his blade or brute strength. A careful balance of intimidation and restraint became part of his strategy, letting the galaxy know that he was unstoppable, yet not inviting unnecessary opposition where it could be avoided. From orbit, Imperial Star destroyers deployed reconnaissance drones, scanning for life signatures and gathering data on the battlefield. Conan anticipated their presence, using the volcanic terrain and smoke to obscure movements. He set traps for those who attempted to predict his path: fallen boulders, molten fissures, and debris fields designed to impede and channel enemies. Every calculated risk reinforced his reputation as a predator who understood both battlefield and psychology. The galaxy's greatest strategists would find his tactics bewildering. No conventional approach could contain him. Meanwhile, rogue Jedi attempted subtle interventions, attempting to use the Force to manipulate him. Conan, aware of the energy rippling around him, adjusted movements instinctively, exploiting their efforts against them. Force-assisted strikes were turned into opportunities for redirection and neutralization. Jedi who expected control found only confusion and counter-maneuvers, now their attempts highlighting the barbarians' adaptability and ingenuity. Each encounter left survivors questioning the limits of both Force and human, or in this case, barbarian, capabilities. The climax of his journey on Vokar Prime occurred when intelligence revealed a converging fleet. Sith reinforcements, Imperial task forces, Mandalorian war parties, and syndicate enforcers, all coordinating to eliminate or capture him. The galaxy had recognized that Conan's presence was a destabilizing variable that could not be ignored. They converged at a massive plateau overlooking a volcanic chasm, planning a decisive strike. Conan approached with full awareness, understanding the enormity of the confrontation. This battle would not only test his strength, but his capacity for strategy, endurance, and moral judgment on an unprecedented scale. The engagement began as the combined forces descended. Sith acolytes ignited lightsabers, their red blades illuminating ash and smoke. Imperial artillery opened fire, orbital strikes shaking the plateau. Mandalorian warriors deployed in coordinated formations, while mercenary and syndicate forces attempted to outflank the barbarian from multiple vectors. Conan moved like a storm incarnate, appearing in multiple zones simultaneously, his strikes precise, calculated, and lethal. Every swing of his blade, every improvisational use of terrain, every redirection of enemy momentum showcased an instinctive genius honed through countless battles. Throughout the engagement, civilians remained a critical consideration. Conan maneuvered around populated areas, ensuring paths of escape while using their presence to influence enemy movements strategically. Explosions were timed, debris fields manipulated, and environmental hazards exploited, all to neutralize threats without unnecessary loss of innocent life. The barbarians' morality, though not philosophical, manifested through instinctive preservation of life where feasible, another factor that elevated him above mere predator status into something closer to legend. Hours passed in relentless combat, the plateau becoming a chaotic tapestry of destruction. Lava streams erupted from fissures, ignited by stray energy blasts. Collapsing cliffs sent mercenaries and Sith acolytes tumbling. Blaster fire and lightsaber strikes collided with reinforced steel, producing showers of sparks. Conan, bruised and bloodied, fought through exhaustion, not adapting continuously as enemy tactics evolved. He used misdirection, environmental hazards, and sheer physical dominance to turn overwhelming numbers into tactical advantage. Every faction suffered, yet none could anticipate his next move. The battle's turning point came when the Sith Lord responsible for coordinating reinforcements engaged directly. Their duel was cataclysmic. Lightsaber and steel collided with explosive force, shaking the plateau and sending clouds of ash into the storm. Conan's instincts, honed across worlds and dimensions, allowed him to anticipate and counter attacks that combined raw power, speed, and the manipulation of battlefield energy. Each strike destabilized enemy formations, creating cascading effects that allowed him to neutralize multiple threats simultaneously. By mid-battle, the remaining factions had fractured. Mandalorian war parties retreated, Imperial squads scattered, and rogue Jedi were forced into defensive stances. Syndicate forces were neutralized through environmental exploitation and direct combat. Conan stood amid the chaos, surveying the battlefield with relentless focus. He had achieved the impossible. A single warrior had repelled a coordinated multi-faction assault that few strategists could have predicted or survived. Yet victory was tempered by reflection. Entire systems had been destabilized. Populations had suffered despite efforts at protection. Conan recognized that his survival, while legendary, carried consequences. This was the reality of being an unstoppable force in a galaxy governed by fragile balance. Every choice, every act of combat, rippled outward, affecting politics, economics, and lives. The barbarian understood that legend demanded not just strength, but the capacity to endure consequence. As the storm abated, Conan observed the surviving factions retreating, regrouping, and reconsidering their strategies. His presence had reshaped power dynamics across multiple systems. He was feared, respected, and studied. The galaxy had learned that no conventional force, Sith, Jedi, Imperial, Rebel, Mandalorian, or mercenary, could predict or contain him. He had become a variable that demanded consideration in every strategic calculation. Walking through the ruined landscape, Conan encountered survivors, civilians, soldiers, and combatants alike. Some approached cautiously, offering aid or seeking reconciliation. Others merely watched, fear and awe etched in their faces. Then the barbarian acknowledged none explicitly, yet his actions had established a presence far beyond his immediate sphere. He had become a force whose reputation alone shaped behavior, strategy, and expectation. In the aftermath, Conan realized a profound truth. Survival in this galaxy was not merely about strength, skill, or instinct. It was about influence. Every act of combat, every tactical decision, and every moral choice contributed to the shape of history itself. He had survived, yes, but he had also altered the trajectory of countless systems, destabilized alliances, and inspired fear and respect in equal measure. His legend was no longer a local tale. It was a galaxy-wide phenomenon. As the twin suns set over the volcanic horizon, Conan sheathed his blade and stood amidst the ruin. The storm had passed, though leaving a world forever changed by his presence. He had faced overwhelming odds, repelled the galaxy's greatest factions, protected innocence, and survived against impossible probability. And yet, he understood that his journey was far from over. The galaxy would continue to respond to him, to test him, to attempt control, and to exploit him. He would continue to adapt, survive, and shape events according to his own code. The barbarian's eyes turned to the stars. Hyperspace lanes stretched outward, filled with systems that had yet to encounter him. Each star represented potential conflict, challenge, or opportunity. Every faction, every planetary system, every force-sensitive being would eventually reckon with the legend of Conan. And when they did, they would find not a man bound by allegiance or ideology, but a force of nature, unyielding, unstoppable, and unbound. Conan took a final step across the volcanic plain, his silhouette stark against the dying light. The galaxy had been tested, and he had survived. Systems would rebuild, alliances would form, and threats would arise. But the barbarian's presence had irrevocably altered the cosmic order. He had become a living storm, a legend whose name would echo across hyperspace lanes, inspiring awe, fear, and respect. And through it all, He remained unbroken, unconstrained, and eternal in his relentless drive. The galaxy would remember him, and they would never be the same. Conan's journey through the galaxy had transformed him from a survivor into a legend. Across volcanic moons, fractured systems, and turbulent hyperspace lanes, he had faced the combined might of Sith, Jedi, and our Imperial forces, Mandalorians, and mercenary syndicates, and emerged victorious. Yet his victories carried consequences: destabilized systems, shattered alliances, and civilians caught in the chaos. The barbarian had learned that being a force unconstrained by ideology demanded not only skill and instinct, but foresight, adaptability, and a moral compass calibrated to survival and protection. Legends are not born from mere power. They are forged in the crucible of impossible odds and the indelible choices made under pressure. Conan had become such a legend, unpredictable, unstoppable, and unbound. His name would resonate across the galaxy, whispered in fear, respect, and awe. Factions would adjust, alliances would realign, and the galaxy would continue to reckon with his presence. But Conan did not seek domination or loyalty. He sought only to live by his code, to survive, and to remain a force beyond prediction. In the end, the galaxy had been changed irrevocably. Systems, factions, and philosophies alike had felt the impact of a barbarian who could not be contained. And somewhere, beyond the stars, new challenges awaited. Conan would meet them as he always had, head-on, with steel in hand, instinct unerring, and a legacy that would endure across the cosmos. The galaxy trembled in the wake of Conan's conquest of Vokar Prime. Across hyperspace lanes, systems whispered his name in awe and fear. Merchants, mercenaries, and spies spread tales of the barbarian who had faced Sith, Jedi, Mandalorians, and Imperial forces all at once, and survived. His legend, once local to the Outer Rim, now spanned multiple sectors. The forces of the galaxy were no longer reacting to each other. They were responding to him. From the volcanic plains of Vokar Prime, Conan surveyed the distant stars. Each gleaming light represented a system shaped by rumor, observation, or direct consequence of his actions. Some planets had sent fleets to investigate the devastation. Others had tightened defenses, fearing a barbarian might appear among their own borders next. Conan's instincts, honed through centuries of survival, had told him the galaxy had grown restless. This restlessness could erupt in ways more dangerous than any single opponent. The first to move were the remnants of the Sith. Word of his victories had reached the Dark Council, and a coalition of dark acolytes, assassins, and Sith sorcerers was dispatched to hunt him. Unlike previous encounters, this force sought not only to kill but to study, trap, and if possible, manipulate him. They understood the barbarian was not merely strong. He was adaptive, unpredictable, and capable of turning their own power against them. As they traveled, the air around them shimmered with the collective anticipation of an ancient enemy encountering a singular anomaly. Conan, aware of the subtle disturbances in the force that even his instincts could perceive, prepared. The volcanic landscape offered natural fortifications, traps, and vantage points. He anticipated their arrival, setting improvised barriers of rock and molten fissures, collapsing chasms where attackers might stumble, and using ash and smoke to obscure movement. Every tactical decision reflected a blend of instinct and observation. He was a predator as much as a warrior, and he had learned to wield the battlefield itself as a weapon. Yet the galaxy's reaction was more than just force. From the core, Imperial warlords and governors saw opportunity in his chaos. They deployed reconnaissance fleets and covert operations to determine whether the barbarian could be controlled, bought, or eliminated. Smugglers, pirates, and syndicate lords sought to capitalize on his legend. Some attempted to recruit him, others to assassinate him. Though the Outer Rim had never known such concentrated interest in a single figure, and all of it converged toward one unpredictable apex. The first clash came when a small contingent of Sith acolytes and mercenaries descended upon Conan in a canyon carved by molten rivers. They sought to encircle him, but the barbarian had already anticipated their strategy. Using shadows, terrain, and debris, he created a funnel, forcing enemies into narrow passages where their numbers became a liability. Blaster fire and lightsaber strikes were met with steel, agility, and calculated violence. Lava eruptions sent attackers scrambling, rock slides immobilized groups, and Conan's strikes, precise and devastating, cut through leadership before rank and file could respond. As he dispatched the first wave, Conan reflected on the complexity of his new reality. And in his homeworld, survival had been straightforward. Strength, instinct, and combat skill determined outcomes. Here, survival demanded calculation, foresight, and diplomacy. Every battle created political ripples. Every choice could spark war, rebellion, or retaliation. He understood that the galaxy was a living organism, and he had become one of its most disruptive currents. From the horizon, a fleet of Mandalorian warships emerged, their tactical pods descending with precision. These warriors were different from those he had faced before, disciplined, honor-bound, and strategic. They did not seek chaos. They sought measured confrontation. Conan observed them, recognizing patterns in deployment and formations. Rather than engage immediately, he used the terrain and environmental hazards to manipulate their approach, forcing them to expend resources and expose vulnerabilities. When he struck, his attacks were surgical, dismantling units in a way that left both survivors and leaders in awe. During a brief lull, a rebel envoy approached under a flag of truce. They offered cooperation, seeing in Conan a force capable of tipping galactic scales. Conan, wary of allegiance, listened. He did not commit, but he weighed their proposal, understanding that alliances, even temporary ones, could serve both survival and strategy. He demanded autonomy, respect for his code, and assurance that innocence would be protected. The rebels, impressed and cautious, agreed. The envoy left, carrying both intelligence and a warning. The galaxy's factions were consolidating, and Conan's legend would provoke responses unlike anything he had yet encountered. As the days passed, a new pattern emerged. Smaller systems attempted to resist, deploy ambushes, or capture him. Conan adapted continuously, using deception, misdirection, and raw combat ability. He employed environmental hazards, lava flows, collapsing rock, and volcanic gas to neutralize threats efficiently. Yet he also developed rudimentary strategies for minimizing civilian casualties. The barbarian understood that his legend depended not only on combat prowess but on perception, a figure feared yet not wholly monstrous. Then came intelligence of a greater threat, a coalition of Sith Lords, rogue Jedi, Imperial task forces, and criminal syndicates, all coordinating to neutralize him. Unlike previous engagements, this force was multi-system, multi-faction, and highly adaptive. They had observed his methods, predicted potential movements, and attempted to anticipate his instincts. Conan recognized that survival would demand more than instinct and strength. It would require full mastery of strategy, improvisation, and psychological warfare. The engagement unfolded on a sprawling asteroid field near a disputed trade route. Starfighters streaked across the void, while ground teams attempted to trap him on fractured asteroid surfaces. Conan navigated the terrain with uncanny precision, using broken rock, environmental hazards, and improvised weapons to control enemy movement. Every attack from Sith and Jedi was met with adaptive counters. Every assault from mercenaries or Mandalorians was neutralized by combining terrain, speed, and brute force. The battlefield itself became an extension of his will, an environment manipulated to impose chaos selectively and decisively. Within hours, the Coalition realized they were facing an unpredictable variable that could not be contained by conventional means. Attempts to coordinate attacks failed as Conan exploited minor mistakes, terrain anomalies, and psychological pressure. He disoriented leaders, fractured units, and turned environmental hazards into instruments of dominance. Each engagement left surviving forces awestruck. They had encountered skill, strategy, and instinct, amplified beyond anything known in the galaxy. During the climax of this confrontation, Conan faced simultaneous threats: Sith acolytes attempting a flanking maneuver, rogue Jedi manipulating asteroid trajectories, Mandalorian squads attempting to encircle, and mercenary groups deploying explosives and heavy weapons. He responded with unparalleled adaptability. Using molten asteroid cores, debris catapults, and explosive counters, he dismantled multiple threats at once. His movements were precise, brutal, and instinctive, yet calculated to minimize civilian harm where possible. Finally, with the Coalition fractured and retreating, Conan established a temporary stronghold on a defensible asteroid. Here he evaluated the broader consequences of his actions. Systems destabilized, factions weakened, and the galaxy now recognized him as a singular variable of immense influence. He understood that survival was no longer a matter of combat alone. It was about perception, diplomacy, and anticipation. Even the galaxy's most disciplined planners now recalibrated based on his movements, legend, and unpredictability. From this vantage point, Conan surveyed the stars. Hyperspace lanes stretched outward, each representing a new challenge or potential alliance. Rogue factions and emergent threats would inevitably converge, yet he was ready. His legend had become a tool, a weapon, and a shield. Each step forward would continue to reshape the galaxy, testing not only his combat prowess but his ability to influence, manipulate, and endure. Conan understood a new truth. He was no longer merely a warrior. He was a force of nature, a variable that had disrupted the galaxy's equilibrium. Survival demanded not only instinct and strength, but understanding of political, social, and moral consequences. He had become a legend, a storm whose name would echo across systems, inspiring awe, fear, and respect. And with every calculated step, he would continue to shape the galaxy in ways no single faction could predict. Across the Outer Rim and beyond, the systems adjusted, Sith Lords plotted retaliation, Imperial governors reorganized, Mandalorian clans debated honor and strategy, and rebel cells weighed potential alliances. Every observer understood one immutable truth. Conan had altered the galaxy's trajectory. His actions would resonate for decades, his influence shaping decisions, conflicts, and legacies long after any single battle had ended. And as the barbarian strode across the asteroid, blade at his side, eyes fixed on distant stars, he knew that the galaxy had only begun to reckon with his presence. Systems, factions, and powers would continue to test him, yet he would endure. He had become more than legend. He was a variable that could not be contained, a storm beyond prediction, a force shaping history itself. The galaxy had learned the name Conan, and it would never forget it.